Sarah Martinez had always been small for her age. At 28, she barely reached 5 feet 4 inches, and her slight frame often made people underestimate her presence. Working as a military contractor at the Naval Special Warfare Command in Coronado, California, she had grown accustomed to the questioning looks and whispered doubts about her capabilities. The morning sun cast long shadows across the training compound as Sarah walked toward the briefing room, her laptop bag slung over her shoulder. She wore simple civilian clothes, dark jeans and a plain white button-down shirt, nothing that would indicate her extensive military background. To most observers, she looked like any other contractor or administrative staff member navigating the busy naval facility. Commander Jake Thompson was conducting a training session with a group of Navy SEALs when Sarah entered the room. The 12 elite soldiers were discussing advanced combat tactics, their conversation filled with technical jargon and battle-tested strategies. Thompson, a veteran SEAL with over 15 years of experience, barely glanced up as she quietly took a seat in the back corner. As I was saying, Thompson continued, pointing to a tactical diagram on the whiteboard, urban warfare requires split-second decision-making and absolute trust in your team. Every member must prove their worth under extreme conditions. One of the younger SEALs, Petty Officer Marcus Chen, noticed Sarah's presence and nudged his teammate. "Who's the civilian?" he whispered, loud enough for others to hear. Sarah kept her expression neutral, accustomed to such reactions. She had been invited to observe this particular training session as part of her contract work, analyzing team dynamics and operational efficiency for a classified program. Her credentials were impressive on paper, but paper meant little in a room full of battle-hardened warriors. Lieutenant Ryan Foster, known for his direct approach, turned in his chair to face Sarah. "Excuse me, miss. I think you might be in the wrong room. This is a classified briefing." Before Sarah could respond, Thompson looked up from his materials. "She's supposed to be here, Foster. Contractor Sarah Martinez. She's observing for the efficiency review program." A murmur ran through the group of SEALs. They had heard about the review program, another bureaucratic initiative that would supposedly improve their already exceptional performance. Most viewed it with skepticism, and having a small civilian woman conducting the evaluation only added to their doubts. Sergeant First Class David Rodriguez, a massive man with arms like tree trunks, leaned back in his chair. "No offense, ma'am, but what exactly qualifies you to evaluate how we do our job? Have you ever been in combat?" Sarah met his gaze steadily. "I'm just here to observe today, Sergeant. But, to answer your question, yes, I have." This response drew more attention from the group. Chief Petty Officer Williams, the oldest member of the team at 35, studied her more carefully. Something in her posture and the way she carried herself suggested military training, but her appearance was so ordinary that it was hard to believe. "What branch?" Williams asked, his tone respectful but skeptical. "Army," Sarah replied simply. "What unit?" Foster pressed, now fully engaged in what had become an impromptu interrogation. Sarah hesitated for a moment, not because she was unsure of her answer, but because she knew the reaction it would provoke. "Special Operations." The room fell silent. Every SEAL was now focused on her, their earlier dismissive attitudes replaced by curiosity and doubt. Special Operations was a broad term that could mean many things, from intelligence work to support roles. It didn't necessarily imply combat experience. Chen, emboldened by his teammates' interest, decided to push further. "Special Ops covers a lot of ground. What did you actually do? File paperwork? Run communications?" Sarah's jaw tightened slightly, but her voice remained calm. "I was an operator." This claim was met with barely concealed skepticism. The idea that this small, unassuming woman had served as a special operations operator seemed impossible to the battle-tested SEALs. They had worked alongside various special ops units throughout their careers, and none of them had encountered anyone quite like Sarah. Rodriguez shook his head with a slight smile. "Look, no disrespect, but operators are a pretty exclusive club." "What unit specifically?" "Delta Force," Sarah said quietly. The silence that followed was different from before. It was charged with disbelief and challenge. Delta Force, officially known as 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta, was among the most elite and secretive military units in the world. The idea that this civilian contractor had once been part of such an organization seemed absurd. Foster actually laughed. Right. And I'm secretly a NASA astronaut. Come on, you expect us to believe that? Thompson looked uncomfortable with the direction the conversation was taking, but he was also curious about his contractor's background. Ms. Martinez, perhaps you could provide some clarification about your service record? Sarah remained seated, her hands folded in her lap. She had known this moment would come eventually. Her cover story as a simple contractor could only hold up under so much scrutiny, especially among military personnel trained to spot deception. What would you like to know? She asked. Williams leaned forward. How about your MOS? Your deployment history? Something that proves you're not just making this up. My military occupational specialty was 18Z, Special Forces Operations Sergeant. I served 3 deployments in Afghanistan, 2 in Iraq, and several classified operations I can't discuss. The specificity of her answer gave the SEALs pause. The MOS she cited was legitimate and not widely known outside military circles. Still, anyone could look up such information online. What weapons were you qualified on? Chen asked, testing her knowledge. M4A1 carbine, M249 SAW, M240B machine gun, M110 SAS sniper rifle, M2.50 caliber, various sidearms including Glock 19 and Siggisour P226. I also have experience with foreign weapons systems including AK variants and RPGs. Her rattled-off list was impressive and accurate, but the SEALs remained unconvinced. Many civilians with military interest could memorize such information. Rodriguez decided to try a different approach. Okay, let's say you're telling the truth. What was your call sign? Sarah's expression grew more serious. Phantom. And your team leader? Colonel James Harrison, call sign Reaper. Foster pulled out his phone, presumably to verify the information, but Sarah continued speaking. You won't find much about Colonel Harrison online. Most of his service record is classified. But you might find references to Operation Silent Thunder from 2019, though the details are redacted. The mention of a specific operation name that sounded legitimate gave the SEALs more pause. However, their skepticism remained strong. The woman before them simply didn't fit their mental image of an elite special operations soldier. Look, Foster said, putting his phone away, I'm not trying to be difficult, but you have to understand our position here. You're asking us to believe that someone who looks like she'd have trouble opening a pickle jar was part of the most elite fighting force in the world. Sarah's eyes flashed with something that might have been anger, but her voice remained level. Appearances can be deceiving, Lieutenant. Prove it, Rodriguez challenged. If you're really who you say you are, prove it. The tension in the room was palpable. Thompson looked ready to intervene and restore order to his training session, but he was also interested in seeing how this would play out. His contractor had always been professional and knowledgeable, but he had never suspected such an extraordinary background. Sarah sat quietly for a long moment, weighing her options. She could simply refuse to engage with their challenges and maintain her cover as a civilian contractor. Or she could give them the proof they were demanding, knowing that once she did, everything would change. What kind of proof would satisfy you? She asked finally. Foster grinned, thinking he had called her bluff. How about you show us some of those elite combat skills? Physical demonstration tends to be pretty convincing. Sarah looked around the room at the 12 SEALs, all of whom were watching her with mixtures of amusement and skepticism. These were some of the most physically capable and mentally tough individuals in the world, and they were essentially daring her to prove herself against them. You want a demonstration? She asked, her tone remaining calm despite the challenge in her eyes. Why not? Chen said with a shrug. If you're really Delta Force, this should be easy for you. Sarah slowly stood up from her chair, and, for the first time, the SEALs noticed something different about her movement. There was a controlled precision to it, an economy of motion that suggested extensive training. But she was still just a small woman in civilian clothes, and they remained confident in their assessment.
"What did you have in mind?" Sarah asked.
Williams, who had been the most respectful in his questioning, spoke up.
"Maybe we're getting a little carried away here.
We don't need to turn this into some kind of contest."
But Rodriguez was already standing. "No, I think this is exactly what we need. Talk is cheap.
If she wants us to take her seriously, let her back up her words with actions." Thompson finally decided to intervene.
"Gentlemen, this is getting out of hand. Ms. Martinez is here in a professional capacity, not to participate in some kind of hazing ritual."
But Sarah raised her hand to stop him.
"It's all right, Commander.
They have every right to be skeptical.
In their position, I would be too."
She looked directly at Rodriguez.
"What exactly are you proposing, Sergeant?"
Rodriguez's grin widened.
"Simple hand-to-hand combat demonstration.
Nothing serious, just enough to see if you actually know what you're doing."
"Against who?" "Against me."
The suggestion hung in the air like a challenge that couldn't be ignored. Rodriguez was 6 feet 3 inches tall and weighed at least 220 pounds. He was in peak physical condition and had years of combat experience. The idea of him sparring with Sarah seemed almost comical to most of the observers. Sarah looked at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly.
"All right. But not here. Too confined. Is there a training mat available?"
Thompson pointed toward an adjacent room. "There's a small gym next door with mats, but I really don't think this is necessary."
5 minutes, Sarah said, looking back at Rodriguez. "Basic grappling. No striking.
First to achieve submission hold wins."
Rodriguez nodded eagerly. "You're on."
As the group moved toward the gym, Sarah began removing her jacket and rolling up her sleeves. For the first time, the SEALs could see her arms, which were more toned and muscular than her clothing had revealed. There were also faint scars visible on her forearms, the kind that came from real combat, not training accidents. The gym was small but adequate, with wrestling mats covering most of the floor. The SEALs formed a loose circle around the designated sparring area, their expressions ranging from amused anticipation to genuine concern about the mismatch they were about to witness. Rodriguez removed his shirt, revealing the impressive physique of a career military athlete. Next to him, Sarah looked even smaller and more vulnerable. She tied her hair back in a simple ponytail and checked that her clothing wouldn't restrict her movement.
"You sure about this?" Rodriguez asked, offering her one last chance to back down. Sarah looked up at him with an expression that was completely calm and focused. "I'm sure." They moved to opposite sides of the mat and faced each other. Thompson looked ready to call off the demonstration, but something in Sarah's demeanor made him hesitate. Despite her size disadvantage, she showed no signs of fear or uncertainty. "Ready?" Rodriguez asked. Sarah simply nodded.
What happened next would be talked about in SEAL training facilities for years to come. Rodriguez approached Sarah with the confidence of a man who had never lost a sparring match to someone half his size. He moved in slowly, planning to use his reach and strength advantage to control the engagement from the start. His strategy was simple: get a solid grip, use his weight to bring her down, and end the demonstration quickly and decisively. Sarah remained perfectly still until Rodriguez was within arm's reach. Then, she exploded into motion. Her first move was so fast that several of the watching SEALs missed it entirely. She dropped low and to the side, avoiding Rodriguez's reaching hands while simultaneously sweeping his lead leg. As he stumbled forward, trying to regain his balance, Sarah flowed behind him like water, her movements precise and economical. Before Rodriguez could react, Sarah had secured a rear naked choke. Her arm snaked around his neck with lightning speed, while her legs wrapped around his waist from behind. The technique was executed with textbook precision, cutting off blood flow to his brain rather than restricting his breathing. The entire sequence took less than 3 seconds. Rodriguez's eyes widened in shock as he felt the choke tightening. He tried to reach back and grab Sarah, but she had positioned herself perfectly to avoid his attempts while maintaining the hold. He attempted to throw himself backward to slam her against the mat, but Sarah anticipated this and used his momentum to tighten the choke further.
Within 10 seconds, Rodriguez was tapping frantically against Sarah's arm, signaling his submission.
Sarah immediately released the hold and stepped back as Rodriguez dropped to his knees, gasping and holding his throat.
The silence in the gym was absolute. Every SEAL was staring at Sarah with expressions of complete disbelief.
"Holy shit," Chen whispered, voicing what everyone was thinking. Rodriguez slowly got to his feet, his face flushed with embarrassment and oxygen deprivation. He looked at Sarah with a mixture of respect and confusion.
"How the hell did you do that?" Sarah's expression remained calm and professional. "Leverage, timing, and technique. Size isn't everything in close combat." Foster stepped forward, his earlier skepticism replaced by intense curiosity. "That was impressive. But Rodriguez might have been going easy on you."
Rodriguez shot him a sharp look.
"I wasn't going easy on anyone. She's legit." But Foster wasn't convinced by a single demonstration. One lucky move doesn't prove anything. Anyone can get lucky once.
Williams nodded in agreement. No disrespect to what just happened, but Delta Force operators face multiple opponents, work under extreme stress, handle complex weapons systems.
Combat isn't just about grappling.
Sarah turned to face the group, and, for the first time since entering the briefing room, she looked completely comfortable and confident. The uncertain contractor persona had been replaced by something harder and more dangerous. "What would convince you?" she asked.
Thompson stepped forward, concerned about where this was heading. "Gentlemen, I think we've seen enough. Ms. Martinez has clearly demonstrated that she has significant combat training."
But Chen was already speaking.
"Weapons handling. If you're really special operations, show us your weapons skills." Sarah looked at Thompson. "Commander, do you have access to a firing range?" Thompson hesitated.
Allowing a civilian contractor to handle weapons on a military facility required paperwork and permissions that could become complicated. But his curiosity was getting the better of his caution. "The range is available, but I'm not sure about the protocols for contractor access."
"I have current weapons qualifications," Sarah said.
"All the necessary clearances and certifications."
"It's all in my file." Williams looked intrigued. "What kind of qualifications?"
"Expert marksman with rifle and pistol.
Qualified on all NATO small arms.
Advanced tactical shooting instructor certification."
Foster laughed. "Of course you do. Let me guess, you're also a demolitions expert and a helicopter pilot?" Sarah's expression didn't change. "I am qualified on explosives handling and breaching charges."
"I'm not pilot qualified, but I am certified for fast rope insertion and halo jumps." The casual way she rattled off these impressive qualifications only added to the SEAL's skepticism.
It seemed too convenient, too comprehensive to be believable.
Rodriguez, still rubbing his neck, had a different perspective after being on the receiving end of Sarah's skills. Maybe we should give her a chance to prove it.
20 minutes later, the group had relocated to the base firing range.
Thompson had made the necessary calls and secured permission for a demonstration, though he was beginning to wonder if he was making a mistake. The range officer, Gunner Sergeant Patricia Mills, had set up a variety of targets at distances ranging from 25 to 300 meters. Sarah stood before a table displaying several weapons, an M4A1 carbine, a Glock 19 pistol, and an M110 semi-automatic sniper rifle. She examined each weapon briefly, checking their condition and familiarizing herself with any modifications or accessories. "What's the challenge?" she asked.
Foster pointed to the targets. "Standard qualification course. Hit the targets in the designated scoring zones within the time limits. Nothing fancy."
Sarah picked up the Glock 19 first, checking the magazine and chamber before assuming a proper shooting stance. The SEALs watched with professional interest, noting her grip, stance, and breathing technique. Everything looked textbook correct, but many people could master the fundamentals in a controlled environment.
Ready? Mills called out. Sarah nodded, and Mills started the timer. The first phase involved engaging multiple targets with the pistol at varying distances.
Sarah moved through the course with fluid precision, her shots coming in rapid but controlled pairs.
The sound of bullets striking targets echoed across the range in a steady rhythm. When the pistol phase ended, Sarah smoothly transitioned to the M4 carbine.
Her movements were economical and practiced as she engaged targets at longer distances. The rifle seemed to become an extension of her body, tracking smoothly from target to target. The final phase involved the M110 sniper rifle and targets at 300 meters.
Sarah settled into a prone position, adjusting the scope and controlling her breathing.
The watching SEALs could see the intense concentration on her face as she calculated wind speed and distance.
3 shots rang out in quick succession.
When the course ended, Mills called for a ceasefire and activated the target retrieval system. As the targets came back, the SEALs gathered around to examine the results. Every shot had hit within the expert qualification zones. More impressive than the accuracy was the consistency. Her shot groups were tight and centered, indicating not just good marksmanship but exceptional weapons handling skills. "Jesus," Chen muttered, examining a target that had 3 bullet holes within a 2-inch circle at 300 meters. Foster studied another target, looking for some flaw or sign that the performance had been luck rather than skill.
He found none. This is really expert-level shooting."
Rodriguez nodded, his respect for Sarah continuing to grow.
"I've seen a lot of good shooters, and this is as good as it gets."
But Williams remained skeptical.
"Okay, so you can shoot and, some martial arts.
That still doesn't prove you were Delta Force."
"Lots of people have those skills."
Sarah set down the rifle and faced the group.
"What would prove it to you?" "Tell us about your missions," Williams said. "Real operations, not just training exercises. Give us specifics."
Sarah was quiet for a long moment, weighing how much she could reveal without violating classification restrictions. "Most of what I did is still classified, but I can share some general details." She began describing operations in Afghanistan, providing specific details about terrain, weather conditions, and tactical challenges that rang true to the experienced SEALs. She spoke about working with local forces, conducting raids on high-value targets, and operating behind enemy lines for extended periods. Her knowledge was comprehensive and detailed, covering everything from equipment loadouts to rules of engagement. She described the weight of specific gear, the challenges of operating at altitude, and the psychological stress of prolonged combat operations. As she spoke, the SEALs found themselves believing her story despite their initial skepticism. The details were too specific and too accurate to be fabricated, and her delivery had the matter-of-fact tone of someone recounting actual experiences rather than invented stories. "There was one operation in 2018, Sarah continued, where my team was tasked with capturing a Taliban commander in a village near Kandahar. The intelligence was wrong. Instead of a small compound with minimal security, we walked into a fortified position with over 30 fighters." She described the ensuing firefight with clinical precision, explaining tactical decisions and equipment failures that nearly cost her team their lives. The story had the ring of truth, filled with small details and unglamorous realities that fiction would have omitted. "We were pinned down for 6 hours before air support could reach us," Sarah said. "I took shrapnel in my left shoulder and a bullet grazed my leg, but we managed to extract without losing anyone." Foster looked at her arms again, now understanding the significance of the scars he had noticed earlier.
"Is that where those came from?" Sarah nodded. "Among other places." Chen stepped closer. "Can you show us the wounds?"
This request made Thompson uncomfortable.
"I don't think that's appropriate."
But Sarah was already rolling up her left sleeve, revealing a jagged scar on her shoulder that was clearly from shrapnel rather than a surgical procedure. She also showed them a long, thin scar on her forearm that could only have come from a blade or piece of metal. The physical evidence was compelling, but Williams still wasn't completely convinced.
Scars can come from anywhere. Car accidents, training mishaps. Sarah looked at him with growing frustration.
These men were proving to be harder to convince than she had expected, despite her demonstrations of skill and knowledge.
What exactly would convince you that I'm telling the truth? She asked. Williams thought for a moment. A phone call. Someone from your unit who can verify your story. A commanding officer, a teammate, someone with credibility.
Sarah smiled for the first time since the confrontation had begun.
I can do that.
She pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts, stopping at one particular entry. She showed the screen to Williams, who saw a contact labeled Reaper with a phone number that had a Virginia area code.
Colonel Harrison? Williams asked. He's retired now, but, yes.
He was my team leader for 3 years. Sarah dialed the number and put the phone on speaker.
After 3 rings, a gravelly voice answered. Sarah? Is everything all right? You only call when something's wrong. I'm fine, sir.
I'm actually in a bit of a situation where some Navy SEALs don't believe I served with Delta.
Could you verify my service record? There was a pause, then a chuckle. Who am I talking to? Williams stepped forward. Chief Petty Officer Williams, sir.
We're with DevGru, and we're just trying to verify some claims about military service.
Put me on video call, the voice commanded.
Sarah switched to video, and the screen showed a stern-faced man in his 50s wearing a polo shirt. Despite being in civilian clothes, he carried himself with unmistakable military bearing. Chief Williams, I'm retired Colonel James Harrison, formerly of 1st SFODD. Sergeant Martinez served under my command for 3 years and participated in 37 classified operations. She was one of the finest operators I ever had the privilege to work with. The validation from a credible source left the SEALs speechless. Harrison continued speaking, providing details about Sarah's service that only someone with direct knowledge could know.
Is there anything specific you'd like to know about her record? Harrison asked. Foster found his voice.
Sir, with respect, she just doesn't fit the profile of what we'd expect from a Delta operator.
Harrison laughed.
Son, that was exactly why she was so effective.
Nobody ever saw her coming.
Sarah earned her call sign Phantom because she could disappear in plain sight and strike when the enemy least expected it. The colonel's words hung in the air as the SEALs processed this information. Everything they thought they knew about elite military operators was being challenged by the small woman standing before them.
Anything else? Harrison asked. Williams shook his head. No, sir, thank you for your time. After Sarah ended the call, the group stood in awkward silence.
The verification from Colonel Harrison had removed any remaining doubt about her credentials, but the SEALs were struggling to reconcile what they had learned with their preconceptions. Rodriguez was the first to speak.
I owe you an apology. We all do. Sarah shook her head. No apology necessary. I understand why you were skeptical. But Foster wasn't ready to let it go. How is it possible that someone like you could succeed in that environment?
No offense, but you're not exactly physically imposing.
Sarah's expression grew serious. That's exactly the point.
Everyone expects a certain type of soldier.
Male, tall, heavily muscled, intimidating.
When you don't fit that profile, people underestimate you. And, in special operations, being underestimated can be the difference between mission success and failure. She gestured toward the targets, still displaying her expert marksmanship.
Physical strength isn't everything.
Intelligence, adaptability, and precision often matter more than raw power. I could infiltrate areas where a typical special operations soldier would stand out immediately.
Chen nodded slowly, beginning to understand. You could blend in anywhere. Exactly.
I've posed as a college student, a journalist, a businesswoman, even a tourist. People see what they expect to see, and they never expect to see a Delta Force operator who looks like someone's little sister. The explanation made sense, but it challenged everything the SEALs had been taught about their profession. They were used to being the most physically capable people in any room, and the idea that effectiveness could come in such an unexpected package was difficult to accept. Thompson, who had been quietly observing the entire demonstration, finally spoke up.
Ms. Martinez, I think we owe you a significant apology.
Your qualifications for the efficiency review program are clearly beyond question. But, as the group began to disperse, preparing to return to their original training session, Sarah realized that the real challenge was just beginning. She had proven her credentials, but now she would have to work with these men who had just seen their assumptions about military excellence completely overturned. The looks they were giving her had changed from skepticism to something much more complex, a mixture of respect, curiosity, and uncertainty about how to interact with someone who defied all their expectations. What none of them realized was that this confrontation had awakened something in Sarah that she had tried to suppress since leaving active duty. The adrenaline, the challenge, the need to prove herself, it all reminded her why she had loved her time in special operations, and why civilian contractor work had never quite satisfied her the same way. As they walked back toward the briefing room, Sarah caught her reflection in a window and barely recognized the person looking back. The meat contractor was gone, replaced by the confident operator she had once been. The question now was whether she could put that genie back in the bottle, or if this revelation would change everything about her carefully constructed civilian life. The atmosphere in the briefing room had completely shifted when the group returned from the firing range. Where there had been casual dismissal and skepticism before, there was now a charged tension that came from having their worldview fundamentally challenged. The SEALs took their seats with a new awareness of the woman who had been quietly observing them from the back corner. Sarah settled back into her original position, but her posture was different now. The hunched shoulders and careful invisibility were gone, replaced by the confident bearing of someone who belonged in rooms full of elite warriors. She no longer looked like she was trying to disappear. Commander Thompson attempted to return to the original training agenda, but the focus in the room had shifted entirely. Every SEAL was stealing glances at Sarah, processing what they had witnessed and trying to reconcile it with their preconceptions about military service. Foster leaned over to whisper to Chen. I still can't wrap my head around it. She took down Rodriguez like he was a rookie. Did you see those shot groups? Chen whispered back. I've been shooting for 15 years and I couldn't do that consistently. Thompson cleared his throat, trying to regain control of his classroom. Gentlemen, if we could return to our discussion of urban warfare tactics. But Williams had a different idea. Commander, with respect, I think we have an opportunity here that we shouldn't waste. Thompson raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Williams turned to face Sarah directly. Ms. Martinez, would you be willing to share some insights from your experience? I mean, we just spent an hour doubting your credentials, and now we find out you have more combat experience than most of us combined. Sarah hesitated. Her role was supposed to be observation and analysis, not active participation in training. But the request was genuine, and she could see the curiosity in their faces. What would you like to know? Rodriguez, still somewhat embarrassed by their earlier encounter, raised his hand. How did unconventional operators like yourself approach missions differently than traditional teams? The question opened a floodgate of professional curiosity. Sarah found herself describing infiltration techniques that relied on social engineering rather than force, explaining how appearing harmless could provide access that no amount of tactical gear could achieve. There was a mission in Iraq where we needed intelligence from a businessman who was suspected of funding insurgent activities, Sarah said. A traditional raid would have been too risky and probably wouldn't have yielded the information we needed. So I spent 2 weeks establishing cover as a potential business partner. She described the careful process of building trust and creating opportunities for surveillance, explaining how her appearance and demeanor allowed her to get close to targets who would have been immediately suspicious of a typical operator. The key was becoming someone they wanted to trust, Sarah continued. People have unconscious biases about who represents a threat. A small woman in business attire discussing import opportunities doesn't trigger defensive instincts the way a military-age male would. Foster shook his head in amazement. That's like something out of a spy novel. It's more common than you might think, Sarah replied.
Special operations isn't always about kicking down doors and engaging in firefights.
Sometimes the most effective approach is the one nobody sees coming. Thompson found himself genuinely interested in this perspective. In his years of SEAL training and operations, the focus had always been on direct action, overwhelming force applied with precision and speed. The idea of achieving objectives through deception and infiltration was theoretically familiar but practically foreign.
How did you transition between cover identity and operational mode? Thompson asked. Sarah smiled slightly. The same way I transitioned from contractor to operator today. People see what they expect to see, until you give them reason to see something else. Chen leaned forward. What was the most challenging aspect of that kind of work? Sarah's expression grew more serious. The isolation. When you're operating under deep cover, you can't rely on your team the same way.
If something goes wrong, you might be completely on your own for hours or even days before extraction is possible. She described the psychological challenges of maintaining a false identity while staying alert for threats and gathering intelligence. The stress of never being able to completely relax, of constantly analyzing every interaction for potential danger or opportunity. There were times when I had to make split-second decisions about whether to maintain cover or take action, Sarah said. If you blow your cover too early, you lose access to information that could save lives. If you wait too long, you might not be able to prevent an attack. Williams was beginning to understand the complexity of her former role.
How do you train for that kind of decision-making? You don't, really, Sarah admitted.
You can run scenarios and practice maintaining cover, but the real test comes when you're in the field with real consequences.
Some people have the temperament for it, others don't.
The conversation continued for another hour, with Sarah answering questions about everything from equipment selection to psychological preparation for extended undercover work.
The SEALs found themselves gaining insights into aspects of special operations they had never considered. As the official training session came to an end, Rodriguez approached Sarah privately. I wanted to apologize again for earlier. And I wanted to ask you something. Sarah nodded for him to continue. How do you deal with people constantly underestimating you? Doesn't it get frustrating? Sarah considered the question carefully.
It used to bother me a lot when I was younger. But I learned to see it as an advantage rather than an insult.
When people underestimate you, they reveal information they wouldn't share otherwise.
They let their guard down in ways that can be very useful. She paused, then added, but I'll admit, there are times when it gets old.
Today was one of them. Rodriguez grimaced. We were pretty hard on you. You were doing your job.
I would have been suspicious too if someone made those claims without backing them up. Foster joined the conversation, having overheard their exchange.
Can I ask you something? Why did you leave active duty? Sounds like you were good at what you did. Sarah's expression grew distant.
I did 12 years of active service.
37 operations, multiple deployments, more close calls than I care to count. After a while, the stress catches up with you. I wanted a normal life. And, now? Chen asked, approaching the group.
Sarah looked around the room at the SEALs who had challenged her and, ultimately accepted her.
I'm not sure what I want anymore. The honest admission hung in the air.
Sarah realized that the confrontation had awakened something she thought she had successfully buried. The adrenaline rush of proving herself, the satisfaction of using her skills, the camaraderie of working with elite operators, it all reminded her of what she had given up. Thompson rejoined the group as other SEALs drifted out to continue their training schedule. Ms. Martinez, I hope you'll consider sharing more insights during your review process.
I think my teams could benefit significantly from your perspective.
Sarah nodded absently, her mind elsewhere.
Of course, Commander.
As the briefing room emptied, Sarah found herself alone with her thoughts. She looked at her hands, noting the muscle memory that had kicked in during her weapons demonstration. Her body remembered skills she hadn't used in 3 years, responding with precision she thought she had lost. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Colonel Harrison. Heard you had to pull rank on some SEALs today.
How did it feel to be back in action?
Sarah stared at the message for a long moment before typing her response, like coming home. She sent the message and immediately regretted it. Coming home was exactly what it had felt like, and that realization was deeply unsettling. She had built a careful civilian life, complete with a normal job and normal relationships. She had convinced herself that she was content with safety and routine. But the events of the day had stripped away that illusion. When faced with a challenge to her capabilities and identity, she had instinctively reverted to the person she had been in uniform. The skills were still there, sharper than ever. The confidence was still there, waiting beneath the surface. Most troubling of all, the desire to use those skills was still there, stronger than she had admitted to herself.
Another text from Harrison: there's a position opening up. Instructor role at the training facility. Interested?
Sarah stared at the message for several minutes before turning off her phone without responding. She wasn't ready to make that decision, but she was no longer sure she could go back to pretending to be just another contractor. 3 days later, Sarah was walking across the Coronado base when she encountered several of the SEALs from the training session. Instead of the polite but distant nod she usually received, Rodriguez called out to her.
"Hey, Phantom."
The use of her call sign stopped her in her tracks. She turned to see Rodriguez, Chen, and Foster approaching with genuine smiles.
"How's the review going?" Foster asked. "Fine," Sarah replied, still adjusting to their changed dynamic. "I'm finding some interesting patterns in team performance." Chen grinned. "I bet you are. You probably see things the rest of us miss." The casual acceptance was both gratifying and unsettling. For 3 years, Sarah had been invisible on this base, just another face in the crowd of contractors and civilians. Now she was being acknowledged as a peer by some of the most elite warriors in the world. "We were talking," Rodriguez said, "and we wanted to thank you. That demonstration the other day, it really opened our eyes to some things we hadn't considered." "What do you mean?" Foster looked slightly embarrassed. "We realized we've been thinking about threats and capabilities in a very narrow way. If we can be completely fooled by someone on our own side, what else might we be missing in the field?" Sarah understood what he meant. Their assumptions about who could and couldn't be dangerous had been thoroughly shattered, forcing them to reconsider how they assess threats and allies in operational environments. "It's something to think about," she agreed. "There's actually something else," Chen said. "We've been talking to Commander Thompson about incorporating some of your insights into our training program. Different approaches to infiltration and intelligence gathering." The suggestion hit Sarah like a physical blow. They were offering her exactly what she had given up 3 years ago, the chance to train and work with elite operators, to use her skills and experience in meaningful ways. "I appreciate the thought," Sarah said carefully, "but my contract is just for efficiency analysis." "Contracts can be modified," Rodriguez pointed out. "Especially when there's clear value to be added." Sarah excused herself and continued across the base, but the conversation stayed with her. That evening, she found herself reviewing job postings on military contractor websites, looking at positions that would make use of her operational experience rather than just her analytical skills. A week later, Sarah was observing another training exercise when her phone rang. Colonel Harrison's name appeared on the screen. "I need an answer about that instructor position," he said without preamble when she answered. "Sir, I'm not sure I'm ready to go back to that world." "Sarah, I've known you for 8 years. You're dying in that civilian job, and we both know it. You belong with people who understand what you've done and what you're capable of." Sarah looked around the training facility, watching SEALs run complex scenarios with precision and professionalism. She felt the familiar pull of operational excellence, the satisfaction of working with people who shared her commitment to perfection. "The position would be different from your old job," Harrison continued. "Training and development instead of active operations. You'd get to use your skills without the same level of risk." "I need to think about it." "You have 48 hours. After that, the position goes to someone else." Sarah hung up and sat in silence, watching the SEALs complete their exercise.
She thought about the past 3 years of her carefully constructed civilian life, and how empty it had felt compared to the rush of proving herself to these elite warriors. Her phone buzzed with another message, this time from Foster. Beer after work? The team wants to hear more war stories. Sarah stared at the message and realized she had already made her decision. She just hadn't admitted it to herself yet. She typed back, sure. But, I'm buying. I have something to tell you guys. That evening, surrounded by SEALs who now treated her as an equal and colleague, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in 3 years. She felt like herself again. When she called Colonel Harrison the next morning to accept the instructor position, she wasn't returning to her old life. She was finally moving toward the life she was meant to live. The small woman who had walked into that briefing room as an invisible contractor was gone. In her place was a special operations veteran who had remembered that hiding her capabilities wasn't the same as finding peace. Sometimes, the only way to move forward was to embrace everything you had tried to leave behind. 2 months later, Sarah stood before a new group of special operations candidates, no longer hiding behind civilian clothes and a meek demeanor. She wore instructor credentials and carried herself with the confidence of someone who belonged exactly where she was. When one of the candidates questioned whether someone who looked like her could teach them anything about elite combat operations, Sarah simply smiled. "Who wants to volunteer for a demonstration?" she asked. The room fell silent, but, this time, Sarah was exactly where she wanted to be.